Hi, welcome to Why Like Ike. I'm Dennis Weiss. I'm at the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum and Boyhood Home. We're in the museum, actually. Tim Reeves, Jeff Nelson, the experts, me, the question guy. But I have to say, you're kind of in my wheelhouse today with what you put on the table. So we're here to talk about Holocaust Remembrance. This program plays in April. A sobering look into the history of mankind. Tim.
It is, and one thing that we always marvel at here is Eisenhower's foresight in trying to preserve the memory of the death camps. A little background: as the Allies began moving across Europe in the spring of 1945, they began encountering these camps. And Eisenhower toured one on April 12th, 1945 at Ohrdruf, and of course was just appalled with what he saw, but he also, knew that in the future there would be folks who would try to deny that they existed. And so he immediately contacted, his superiors and said, you got to get congressional representatives here, you got to get newspaper reporters here. And so both, all the Allied countries sent folks and collected a lot of the documentary film footage that we see today. And so he was adamant that this history, not be erased. And in fact, have been told by one of his family members that he kept an album of those pictures from the camp when he was there for the liberation, and from time to time would pull them out, as horrible those images were, to remind himself of what that fight was really about. And there's a saying, this won't be an exact quote, but Eisenhower said something like, it's often said the American fighting man doesn't know what he's fighting for, and he said at least now he knows what he's fighting against. And so it was really a big part of Eisenhower's efforts to defeat Nazism.
So Eisenhower's foresight we have seen come true today.
Yeah.
There are not just people, but there are nations who are denying the Holocaust exists today. So we've seen that come true in our lifetime. And it's not insignificant. It's either whether you're geopolitical, religious, or any combination thereof, it's still a significant position, and Eisenhower foresaw this is something that we have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt happened. I read the letter, was it to Marshall he wrote?
Yes. And
he said, I'm going because I want to say that I saw.
That's
Not
right.
that it was written to me in a command report or a field report. I want to say that I saw with my eyes.
And I think he said to combat the tendency in the future to try to deny it. I mean, he just knew instinctively that would occur. And we know a really sad thing is there's a counter narrative that the real Holocaust wasn't the 6 million Jews who were killed by Hitler. They were the 2 million German soldiers that Eisenhower starved to death after the war, which is a complete fabrication. But in my experience in dealing with these folks, everyone who believes that Eisenhower had his own Holocaust deny the actual Holocaust. But again, unfortunately, it's still out there.
So the benefit of today's program is you have some artifacts and we can have conversation about them. We have items that were gifted to Eisenhower because of the event we're talking about today?
Because of the Holocaust. When I was tasked for going through our collection and looking for artifacts related to the Holocaust, we have a plethora, because this museum was founded, at least initially, as a World War II museum. Many of our artifacts are what would be called war trophies that American soldiers brought home from Europe, but we have very, very little from World War II and the Holocaust, primarily because soldiers bring home trophies from their defeated enemies, not from rescued innocents. The concentration camps not only horrified Eisenhower, but they horrified the general soldier. Thus, they didn't bring much back. What we do have, though, are several artifacts from the time of Eisenhower's presidency that were presented to him by various Jewish groups to commemorate his participation and his leadership in the European theater and ending the Holocaust for the global Jewish population, and his work as president at promoting peace, which in the 1950s, if you were Jewish, generally you were trying to move to a safer place, which ended up being usually Israel. And so many of these gifts, or the United States.
Yes.
So many of these gifts are representative of groups, displaced persons groups that had to leave Europe after the war, but they were survivors, and they were honored to meet and to know Eisenhower, and very much respected his role in ending the Shoah or the Holocaust.
So we have lots of people who follow Eisenhower through either this media or others, and things we at the library put out for them to appreciate. And I would say that we have a large cadre of military historians who could talk to us, could indeed do our jobs about the battle for Poland, as an example, the Germans rolling into Poland. Our point today is the battle into Poland, as an example, against Poland was just as much geography, yes, but it was also a bastion of Jewry in Europe, and that was attempting to be erased.
Correct.
By Mr. Hitler.
I mean, that's the true horror of the Holocaust is not simply the numbers of people that were murdered, it's that Hitler was trying to completely erase several stories. The stories of the Jews, the stories of the Roma, the stories of homosexuals. Not just kill people randomly. He wanted to totally eliminate entire groups.
Jehovah's Witnesses as well.
Yes, yes. There were many persecuted peoples. Our focus on the Holocaust is not a focus exclusively on Jews. It was is a focus on the travesty of what was perpetrated against humanity, including the Jews.
Well, another factor in this, in regards to Eisenhower, is the success of the D-Day invasion. If Operation Overlord had failed, probably they estimate another 1 million would have been killed in the camps.
Yeah, good. So. We could sit here without the camera, and maybe we could talk about this without feeling the emotional weight of it. I don't know. I probably could, but I don't know. Maybe we could have a intellectual discussion of this. But you think about it in the terms you just stated, that D-Day success saved an additional 1 million people dying in these death camps, simply because of the rate of production, or reduction, if you will, of the people going in and the ashes coming out.
Yeah, the Nazis probably would have had another at least year to 2 years, perhaps. Yeah. So.
Very sobering thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have some interesting things. I have a sword over here in front of me, Jeff, and the first thing about the Holocaust I'd think of would not be a sword. But
exactly.
But there's a story here, and you can tell it.
The sword and the Jewish Pentateuch, or the Jewish equivalent of the Bible or the Old Testament that we have here, both came from the Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City. They were gifts to Eisenhower at different times. The Pentateuch was actually gifted to him after his presidency. The sword was given to him because of his work as president in promoting peace. And the person who gave the gift wrote a letter to Eisenhower. This sword is reputed to be over 100 years old, made in Germany with silver ornamentation. It was originally given in September 1945 by the Jewish displaced persons in Stuttgart who had been liberated by American troops from the Nazi concentration camps. It was then gifted to Captain Judah Nadich of the U.S. Army. He was serving as the advisor on Jewish affairs to General Eisenhower. By coincidence, the sword's manufacturer is the Eisenhower, German Eisenhower Sword Manufacturer Company. Dr. Nadich eventually became the rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City. He presented the sword to President Eisenhower with the hope that Eisenhower's leadership will fulfill the ancient Hebrew prophecy, quote, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares."
It's interesting, ancient Jewish prophecy. Indeed, it is also the aim of the last book of the New Testament, right? Which people tend to segregate them. I don't. God's people, he didn't really segregate his own word, but it is commonly segregated. But the pounding of swords into plowshares is a prophecy about the coming Prince of Peace.
And Eisenhower worked very, very diligently for peace. It may seem somewhat unusual to say that a war hero who becomes president is a champion of peace, but Eisenhower truly was.
Yes.
And he even stated, and again, this is not an exact quote, but that he hated war as only someone who has experienced war can hate it. And part of that was his trips to the concentration camps and seeing something far beyond the horror of a battlefield.
So I'm going to hold this up again, Dave, just because I want people to see the 10 words. These are the tablets that God wrote. So if you know your Bible history, the 10 Commandments came down on tablets with Moses, but God did the writing. So here's a representation of the 10 words in Hebrew, which are 10 Commandments. My favorite verse in the Bible, I flipped to it. 2 pages are stuck together there, so I can't read it out of this, but Genesis 15:17, I do believe, but it's talking about Abraham, who's the star, if you will, of Genesis, the father of faith, but he was directed by God to create a sacrifice, and he did so. He followed the instructions and laid it out as he was told, but during the night, a flaming torch came by itself and passed between the pieces. The biblical understanding of that is that God himself made the covenant with Abraham and made the sacrifice himself, which ties back to the New Testament, sending his son for a sacrifice of sin. So whether you're a biblical person, whether you're not, the absolute wealth of history laying on a table in front of us, right there, right here, and right over on that little table is astounding.
And in this particular Bible, Dwight Eisenhower himself filled out the front flyleaves.
Yes, with family history.
With family history, and then a description of why he was presented this. It was given to him on May 28th, 1965, again by the Park Avenue Synagogue, to commemorate the 20th anniversary of his participation in freeing, quote, thousands of Jews 20 years earlier from the Nazi prison camps.
I just love that. When you showed it to me before we turned the camera on, my heart almost stopped. So Mr. Eisenhower would have gotten thousands and thousands of gifts. Indeed, they're filling your archives, right? He took the time to he turned this into his family Bible, like we see in the Boyhood Home, the Eisenhower family Bible that's there. And the programs we shot about that, how important that document was to the family Eisenhower. But Dwight David Eisenhower took the time in his own hand to write his family history here, and the reason why it was significant to him. That's a very personal act.
It is, and you often don't see that kind of personal attention either to letters he received or gifts he received. Right. So yeah, you really can't see that. A couple points. Jeff mentioned that the sword was manufactured by the Eisenhower works, and that name Eisenhower means iron hewer or smith.
Yes.
And so you can see that connection to Ike. And then the flaming sword of Shafe, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, which is a flaming sword against a black backdrop, which is the sword of liberation cutting through Nazi tyranny.
Powerful imagery we have today, fellows. So, Jeff, I want you to go to the Torah scrolls and tell us the story.
This is kind of special. The Torah was gifted to Eisenhower at the end of his presidency by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, which is located next to Columbia University.
Okay.
Eisenhower has a little bit of history with the seminary. While he was president of Columbia in 1948 and 49, the Jewish seminary gave him an honorary degree. 1960 rolls around, they present him with this Torah, Jewish Torah, contains the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This Torah comes from Marburg, Germany. Marburg is a relatively small town in Germany. It is somewhat agricultural, so there can be relations made to living in Abilene. This small town in the 1930s had a small Jewish population of about 380 people. During Kristallnacht, its synagogue was burned to the ground.
The Night of Broken Glass.
The Night of Broken Glass. The Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. has a charred fragment of the original Torah that was burned. This Torah was most likely produced after 1945. It was presented to a rabbi in 1950 who was working on religious freedom committees for the United States, for Eisenhower. It was presented to Eisenhower as part of the Universal Brotherhood Award. This Torah was given by the Jewish community of Marburg to the United States as they were leaving in 1950 to immigrate to Israel. The Jewish community in that city was not refounded until the 1980s. There is now, once again, a small Jewish community, but even though it's a large and quite beautiful Torah, the story of just a small town and how easily that town eliminated one of its minorities and got rid of them.
It's a story of towns all over Europe during the time that we are making this program about. The Torah, the scroll itself of a synagogue would have been their most valued possession. In fact, they wouldn't even call it a possession. It was their trust. You know, it was something they were charged with taking care of. They didn't possess it; it possessed them. But what a great story! And again, I know I'm often a little redundant about this, but it's here. It's at the library. You can come, learn, look, learn, listen. You can appreciate your point of view about these artifacts because they're here.
And the records we have relating to the Holocaust and the liberation of the camps. We have a great collection of letters written by a Private Harold Porter, who wrote very graphically and very well of what he encountered and sent the letters home to his parents, which were eventually given to us. And they're so valuable that they're used heavily at the U.S. Holocaust Museum and really by Holocaust scholars from around the world. And you know, they thought to send the originals to the Eisenhower Library. But many primary sources on the Holocaust.
One artifact we haven't talked about, this little lamp. The little lamp, that was a gift from, it's called the Lamp of Freedom, and it was a gift from the United Jewish Appeal. And very much as these other gifts, it was a gift thanking Eisenhower for his role in ending the Holocaust, and also thanking him for his continued role in promoting world peace. The global Jewish community in the 1950s was very interested in maintaining peace because they, almost unlike any other group, had suffered horrendous atrocities during the war, and they were very interested in preventing those atrocities from happening. We do have Eisenhower's response to receiving this lamp. The lamp is from the Middle East. It dates from 50 CE, Common Era, or 50 AD. So it's roughly 2,000 years old, a little older. Dwight Eisenhower writes, "Dear Mr. Rosenwald, I want to tell you again, and in a little more private manner than was possible in front of the cameras, how deeply appreciative I am of the thought that prompted you and your associates to bring me the Lamp of Freedom. I am delighted to accept it on behalf of the members of the Allied Expeditionary Forces of World War II, and I shall forever be grateful for the privilege I had to help in some measure restore dignity and respect to the unfortunate and persecuted people of Europe. The lamp I shall everlastingly treasure, both for what it symbolizes and because it was presented to me by you and your associates."
Powerful letter. There's a great speech.
There's a great speech.
Great speech.
Yet again.
Yeah. So as we close our show today about Holocaust remembrance, and we urge you to spend the month that you'll be watching this on television and on the internet to do your own work in this regard. But I want to point to that little lamp of freedom. It's not very big, Jeff.
Nope.
It's just a little, it would hold only a small flame. But as long as the lamp of freedom, can't quote Eisenhower, but I will paraphrase him. As long as the lamp of freedom holds a little flame, it can be used to light others. And freedom is what must be persisted in order for people to treat each other humanely. Boy, what a powerful show you brought to me today. Thanks for sharing it with me. I really have appreciated it. We hope you enjoyed getting to see some of the artifacts and listen to the experts here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. I love Why Like Ike show. It's so rewarding to sit here and enjoy the benefits of the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum and Boyhood Home. We appreciate your attendance behind the screen today. Come and see us at the library. I'm Dennis Weiss, Tim Reeves, Jeff Nelson, wishing you a great day.